Welcome to Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. On today's show, we are covering the moves organized labor is making against corporate tyranny. Coal miners in Brookwood, Alabama have been on strike since April 1st. How and why did this strike make its way to New York City this week? And how cool was it that act.tv amplified the voice of labor by covering it live? That's right. I'm tooting act.tv's own horn, toot toot. I'll be bringing you the highlights from that event in our action rundown. And then we speak to independent labor journalist. You may know her from the internet as Grim Kim Kelly, on the ongoing Alabama action. She has been covering it down there. And guess what? We've got president of the Association of Flight Attendants, Sara Nelson, on what it costs to run a strike like this and the state of organized labor in general. I'm excited. Are you excited? Please share, subscribe, comment so that Google and, this is how it helps. Google and Amazon's algorithms can forward pro-labor voices, even though Google and Amazon are anti-labor. It's a good idea. Every act of resistance matters, people. So comment, share, subscribe. And now on to the action report. Over 1,000 coal miners in Brookwood, Alabama have been striking for nearly 4 months in protests of dramatic cutbacks to wages and benefits, as if their job doesn't already cause dramatic cutbacks in their own life expectancy. 5 years ago, workers at Warrior Met Coal saw their pay slashed, paid holidays cut, no time off. They lost that, as well as the ability to earn overtime pay, which is important since many of these miners work over 16 hours a day so that we as a society can keep the lights on at Applebee's. We can talk about that later. Anyway, these mine workers watched their health insurance costs go way up while safety standards and working conditions went way down. At the time, they accepted the cuts because the company was going through bankruptcy, or so they said. Because now that Warrior Met's finances seem to have improved so much that CEOs and shareholders are getting fat checks, the company is still refusing to share the wealth with the workers who sacrificed to save it. That would be one more argument for worker-owned and controlled coal mines, would it not? We can dream as a people. How and why did this Alabama fight wind up in New York City, where many of the workers had never set foot in their lives before? Well, financial giant BlackRock Fund Advisors has a headquarters there. They are Warrior Met's largest shareholder, and they have made millions from the sweat and blood of these workers and their families. Yet, of course, they continue to refuse to recognize the labor and sacrifices that made those billions of dollars possible for them. It is the age-old story of American capitalism, is it not? So this past Wednesday, July 28th, on the anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a group of Warrior Met strikers, along with fellow mine workers from Alabama, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio, went to New York City to take their demands to BlackRock. act.tv was there live. Hopefully you'll be able to see some of that live. I think we have some of that footage. I'm not sure if we shared it or not yet already, but I do have some specific footage that I would like to share with you. Look, there it is. It's beautiful action going on right next to me in this little box. Look at all these people in the big canyons of New York City. It's wonderful. People, again, they came from Alabama, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and I know New Yorkers were there as well in solidarity. They had a lineup of speakers. Larry Spencer went first. He is the vice president of the United Mine Workers Association, and he kind of put in context what all the miners were doing there.
We're right at about 120 days into a strike at Alabama against Warrior Met Coal. Jim Walters in 2016 went bankrupt. Warrior Met took them over. We took a lot lesser contract than what we normally do to try to keep that company going. And now they don't want to pay the profits back that we earned that company. And it's time to make a difference. And we're here to let BlackRock know that we're here today and we'll be back tomorrow if it takes it. If they don't like us in these streets, then they need to get us a contract. Do you hear that, BlackRock? Get us a fair contract and we'll go away. We'll go back to work in those coal mines where we should be. We rode up here on buses to tell you your investments need to be being put to use in these guys' salaries, in these guys' benefits, these guys that have earned you the profits that you're making from these coal mines.
That was Larry Spencer. He is the vice president of the United Mine Workers Association, speaking in New York City. I love the way the guy talked. It was awesome. We have a longer clip of Cecil Roberts. He is the Mine Workers Association Union president. And here he is. I love it. It's the best. Take a listen.
By the way, you are in New York City, and when somebody comes along driving a trash truck, they're union. When somebody comes along and is a building trades person, they're in a union. Chances are somebody comes along with a broom in their hand, they're in the union. The labor movement in New York City. I love the labor movement in New York City. From sweet home, Alabama, the country roads, West Virginia, from Pennsylvania, my old Kentucky home. Everywhere there's coal mine in this nation has shown up here today. But let's give our brothers and our sisters in New York City a UMWA. Thank you, UMWA, UMWA, BlackRock, 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 Warrior Met Co. Inc., Warrior Met Co., Warrior Met Co. I want to talk just a little bit about my brother Larry. Come back up here, Larry. Larry is the general in Alabama. I just happened to do something with Larry along the way. Not only have we rallied together, marched together, dodged trucks together, dodged scabs together, we had the great honor of spending the night in the Tuscaloosa jail together. I really love you, Larry. We got a couple of other people here today that went to jail originally early on in this fight down in Alabama. I think there's 3 or 4 of us that are still out there. If you went to jail down in Tuscaloosa with us, come on up here. I think you should be recognized. If you are a jailbird, come on up here. There ain't nothing wrong with going to jail for justice, my brothers and sisters. I want you to stay right where you are for a second. We got the auxiliary here with us. Come on up here, auxiliary. They've been feeding folks every week, raising money to get kids back to school as school openings approach in Alabama, finding ways to feed kids, lifting the children up, lifting the strikers up, visiting the picket lines. They're doing double duty in this strike. As the president of your union, I want you to know from the very bottom of my heart how proud I am of our members, our officers. those walking the picket lines every day. If you're in this crowd and you came on the buses from Alabama and you've walked the picket lines, come on up here, because I want everybody in New York to know, and I want those people to know, they're trying to kill us on those picket lines. We've had 4 people hit by vehicles on the picket line. This lady right here, I was standing beside her week before last, and she got hit by a vehicle. They did absolutely nothing to that scab that hit her. Now, I want you to hear this. This is the longest strike in the history of Alabama labor. This is the longest strike. And I want these people right here to know something. There's no quit in the UMWA. We'll stay right there with you. We'll get you at the end, so you better make peace now.
That was Cecil Roberts. He is the president of the United Mine Workers Association, speaking in New York City, getting the crowd all riled up, as you saw. This is, if you're just joining us, a demonstration in front of BlackRock, which is the hedge fund that, it's their BlackRock Advisors has their headquarters in New York City. They are the largest shareholder in Warrior Met. They're making a ton of money, and they won't do a decent contract for the workers upon whose backs that money is built. We have other speakers from this action that happened this past Wednesday. Here is William Tegg. He is the executive director of the Union Veterans Council.
I'm trying to show an example for a generation of workers to begin to use their collective power to engage in their communities, engage in their workplace, and take the power back. It is time for workers in America to join forces, to say that things like what Warrior Met is doing to you miners can never happen again.
So many moving speakers at this event. We also had some star power show up. Susan Sarandon was there. Let's hear what she had to say.
Thank you so much for being here. I welcome you to New York City, my home. I'm a union person, and when our union was on strike for 6 months, it was the AFL-CIO that kept us afloat. I thank you. They gave us office space, and they helped us when we had no money left. So I know what it's like to be a union person who's struggling for what's right and for what is owed to you. BlackRock is a horrible smear on the vision of the United States, and so I stand by you one day longer, one day stronger. And we'll be watching you, and I'll use my voice, however little it is, to try to tell people around the world and the United States that aren't aware of what you guys have been doing, because we know that the mainstream media isn't always reporting everything that goes on in this nation. So I'll do whatever I can. Welcome to New York. I'm so respectful of you and so in admiration of your strength. I know it's not easy to take this kind of a stand, but I'm sure when we're together, we will win. So stick with it. I'll be watching. Thank you all for coming to our city, and more power to you.
That was Susan Sarandon, obviously, talking at the coal miners' protest in front of BlackRock that happened this past Wednesday. Hey, she said she'd do anything. Hey, come on our show, Susan. Let's discuss, okay? This is kind of exciting. I mean, it is important to have star power. People listen to them. They can get, a lot of retweets. So, and I love how she basically called out act.tv. She said, this is not getting enough coverage, and that by association means we're doing a great job. Since we're covering it anyway, this can be your home, act.tv. If you're new to act.tv, we're hoping to be your home for following the voices of activism that are not covered in the mainstream media. Cecil Roberts, we heard from him a moment ago, but I do have a beautiful clip of him talking about the general attitude of the miners. It's brief. I think you'll enjoy it. Here it is.
We are not taking this bullshit anymore. And if you think that it's been tough since April 1st to now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
I love it. What's not to love about that? They're not taking any of this BS. Very good. Okay, so coming up next on the program is our interview. Stay tuned for that. We have Kim Kelly and Sara Nelson. They're going to put a lot of context in here. I was able to talk to Kim about how some of these folks are Trump supporters, not all of them. She was surprised at the number that were not. Some are Trump supporters, and how they're finding a coming to the light moment in the fact that they voted for someone who is going to undermine their own economic interests. Very interesting interview. And then, of course, every interview with Flight Attendant Union President Sara Nelson is fabulous. So hang out for our interview segment coming up next. All right, you're watching ActTV. I'm Julianna Forlano. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, tell your friends, throw a party for us, whatever you want to do. We are the voice of activism here in the United States, so we want to grow our audience, and we need your help to do that. Also, I said at the top of the show, if you were watching, that leaving a comment anywhere on the internet helps those people who, would be union busting if they could. They do union busting in their spare time. Amazon, Google, all of those folks, to unknowingly spread pro-labor information and viewpoints. So any kind of comment you can leave helps us, helps that. We have a bunch of good interviews today. Actually, two. Kim Kelly is up first. She's an independent labor journalist who has been following the mine workers strike at Warrior Met since it began. And even before that, she was following the Amazon strike down in Alabama, has a lot to say. Let's listen in. Kim, thanks for joining us today. You've been covering this story since the beginning. Can you tell us what led these miners to strike and basically what's going on in Alabama right now?
Sure. So prior to April 1st, their union, the United Mine Workers of America, were engaged in contract negotiations with Warrior Met Coal. They're trying to get a better deal because their current contract is up. Standard things. But the contract they were working under was already pretty terrible. Warrior Met had come into that mine 5 years previously after the previous owners had gone bankrupt. And so they kind of had workers over a barrel. They're like, hey, we're going to come in. We can hire you back, but these are the concessions you're going to need to make so we can get on our feet. 5 years later, the company is doing fine. Like BlackRock's a major investor. They're not worried about money. But the workers were not really offered anything decent in those initial negotiations, and things broke down to the point where a strike was called on April 1st. And that was 1,100 workers who were out on unfair labor practices strike. It's been almost 4 months, and they're still going strong.
Is this really hitting the company hard in their pocketbook?
I know that I think I was talking to some miners yesterday. They're saying that they've reduced capacity by about a third. I know they've been bringing in replacement workers, scabs. They've had bosses going down to work in the actual mines instead of their air-conditioned offices.
That's a good idea. I think that's a positive outcome no matter what.
Right? I also know that they've actually been purchasing coal from other nearby mines so they can meet their own quotas. So there's definitely been an impact.
Wow. I also saw some video of trucks running into mine workers as they protested.
Yeah, there have been, at this point, 4 documented vehicular assaults on the picket lines. There have been multiple people sent to the hospital. The most recent one, a striking miner's wife was hit. She was actually up here in New York the other day. She's doing okay, but that's such a terrifying thing to have to contend with. And the local police don't do anything about it.
Yes, I've heard these stories before about how the local police are complicit with the top brass at whatever organization, and they do nothing about violence on the picket lines against picketers.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I mean, the companies hired their own armed guards. So on top of the local police and the sheriffs, there's these other guys keeping an eye on things, and none of them are on the workers' side. I've heard workers tell me about instances where, someone gets hit and they show the cops like, hey, they went that away, and the cops are like, oh, yeah, well, you shouldn't have been in the road. Like, there's no sympathy. I mean, we wouldn't expect sympathy from cops on pretty much anything anyway, but this is a very peaceful, they're within their First Amendment rights. They're allowed to be out there. There's a court injunction limiting the amount of people on the actual picket line. They've been adhering to that. And people are still running trucks into them. And there's no one really making a big deal out of it. Like, it should be front page news, and yet they're on number 4.
Have these miners been, are they being paid while they're out on the picket line? They're basically not being paid, I'm assuming.
Right, so there's a strike fund through the union, and that means as long as a worker completes their, I think it's like 12 or 16 hours a week on the picket line, they'll get a strike check. But that's about $650 every 2 weeks, which is not a lot. I'm sure it's very helpful, but it's not a lot. And that's why, there's been a food pantry built up. There's been a lot of community support, because I think about 80% of the workers in those mines are parents. So it's not just them that are feeling the crunch, it's their kids and their families too.
How is it that there are people still working there? They're basically saying, that's fine. You can take away my vacation pay. You can take away overtime hours. You can take away my health care. How is it people can still not be striking?
I mean, I don't understand how a scab can find it within themselves to be a scab to cross a picket line. I know that, people have financial concerns, people have families. There's not a ton of work in the area. It is one of the better paying jobs in the area. So
are they fearful of retribution from the company?
Well, there's that too. It's scary to go on strike, especially if you're going on strike against a company that basically is the nexus of the entire area. Like, the entire community is based around these mines. They kind of have fingers in everything. So there are risks, but all the people who are on strike, they have bills and they have kids too. So it really comes down to whether or not you actually care about the union, you care about that picket line, and you care about solidarity with your fellow workers.
That's great that you brought that up. I was just going to ask about the action that happened yesterday Wednesday in New York City, where the strike was brought to some of the financial industry that is either backing or profiting from what's happening down in the mine, the austerity that is being pressed on the workers. They're making a profit right now, and there were miners from other mining, other areas, Pennsylvania, coming together in solidarity in New York. Can you talk about that?
For sure. There were, I think the numbers I'm hearing, like the final numbers were about 400 miners from Alabama, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. I think Kentucky was out there, and they chartered buses and brought all these folks in. They're all members of UMWA, and they came out to support. And of course, there was local support from, folks who are both based in New York. There are other labor leaders that came out. Susan Sarandon showed up.
I saw that. Yeah, we were going to play that clip.
Well, thanks. Well, every little bit helps, Mm-hmm. And it was just a massive picket in front of BlackRock, and it lasted for a few hours. It was a beautiful day. Everyone was really keyed up. Everyone was very excited, because a lot of these folks have never been to New York City before, and now they're coming to the belly of the beast to protest for themselves, their families, stand up for what's right in the middle of Manhattan with skyscrapers everywhere. Like, there was a sea of camouflage. There's tons of media.
We got the images. It looks amazing. Can you talk about the media coverage of this issue? Was there any media? ActTV was there, so we're media. But were there any sort of mainstream outlets covering this protest in New York and the protests in Alabama?
The ones in Alabama, it's kind of just been me and a couple other independent people.
Thank you.
I care, they're my guys. But
I hear you.
I'm a softie. I grew up in like a working class, blue collar, rural kind of place. So everyone down there looks like my dad or my aunts, But there hasn't been a ton of local coverage at all in Alabama. There's been a little bit on things like AL.com, and a couple local news stations have popped up here and there. But it's been pretty skimpy. But up here, I think one of the reasons they came to New York was like, okay, the media is based in New York. Like, if we come to their doorstep, they have to pay attention. And I know that ABC News is out there, HuffPost is out there, status quo. There are definitely a bunch of media people running around. I didn't see any like big news vans or like, big fancy rigs. Maybe I wasn't looking hard enough. But
no, you would have seen them. Yeah, you would have totally seen them.
Yeah. Either way. But
well, I also noticed that, there's a couple things that stick out to me as I've been following the story. One, it's in Alabama, and recently the Bessemer fight, the union fight against Amazon, that they didn't unionize it. It didn't work out, but the fight was there, and so this idea that organized labor can have a voice and is important in Alabama was right at the doorstep there. Is there something going on both in that state or around the idea that organized labor can fight, can win things for workers against these giant corporations? Is there something happening in Alabama right now that's moving that forward?
Right. Well, the thing is, there's stuff happening everywhere. There's just not enough people and outlets that care enough to cover it. I ended up covering the coal miner strike because I was in Alabama I'd been going there for a couple months to cover the Amazon effort there. And I just kind of heard about this happening, got a ride out to the picket line, showed up with some donuts, and here I am now.
Here you are on major outlet ActTV.
But just in terms of getting involved. But it's, Alabama has such a deep, rich labor history, and it does have a very strong labor movement. It's just a little smaller, and it has a much higher hill to climb compared to somewhere like New York or California, where the labor laws are more progressive, where the legislators more progressive and aren't, complete maniacs. I mean,
it's such an interesting thing because many of the people, I was watching some other clips, some other people talking about this, many of the people on the picket lines actually voted for Trump and must have voted for those legislatures that you're talking about that would just as soon take away their rights. Do you think that is occurring to them? Or can you give me a sense of how that plays out?
It's definitely interesting. It's been interesting for me to cover this story because as a labor reporter, usually there's kind of a baseline kind of layer of progressivism you can assume, but this is kind of uncharted territory. Like the majority of folks, they are conservative. But not all of them. It's not a monolith, right? But there are a lot of people that voted for Trump because they thought he would bring back coal, because they didn't like how the government was being run for whatever reasons they may have had. But I think there is this kind of realization that, well, we've been out here for 4 months. Fox News hasn't shown up. Tucker Carlson hasn't done a story about us. No Republican politicians have come by or even tweeted about us. These are supposed to be the people that are fighting for us, but they're totally silent. Meanwhile, the Alabama, the local Democratic Party has been donating food and spreading awareness, and tons of local socialist anarchist groups have been doing mutual aid and trying to raise money and support the strike too. And all of the support is really coming kind of from one area. And I think that is something that folks who may have immediately dismissed that side of the world are kind of considering and thinking about, and maybe changing a little bit of the way they see things. Because
Trump did say he was going to bring coal back, and he did bring coal back, but the only or he left coal as it was, whatever, he didn't take it away. But the only people who seem to be benefiting from that are the people at the top and Blackwater.
I had a conversation with a miner named Shane. He was saying, I voted for Trump. He said he would bring back coal, and when he came in, the coal profits went they skyrocketed. And I was like, well, Shane, did any of that come down to you? Did you see any of that? He's like, oh, well, no, ma'am. And it's like, well, maybe there's something to that. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to have those kinds of conversations and maybe shift some perspectives. And, this is an opportunity for people that actually want to help the working class and can maybe, take a minute to listen and be like, okay, I hear you. But what about this? This doesn't seem fair. This doesn't seem right. This guy's not listening. Maybe that was a mistake.
For people who obviously weren't there on Wednesday and who haven't been in Alabama for the last couple of months, can you give a sense of what it feels like on the picket line?
People are very committed. They're tired. They want to go back to work. A lot of them, actually, a lot of the fathers specifically, they're relishing the fact that they're actually able to see their kids and see their families. Because usually, I mean, these folks work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. Some of them commute up to an hour away from the mines. There's not a lot of family time, not a lot of personal time built in. And I'm sure their bodies are appreciating the break, but they want to be making money. They want to be doing their job.
Has anyone mentioned a Green New Deal to them? Like, could we switch you? We're going to give you a job not in coal mine. Has anyone suggested that perhaps the policies of Democrats might be good for them?
So that's not. So when you approach those kind of conversations, like there's certain like trigger words that it's just going to be a shutdown.
Green New Deal,
yeah. Like
green anything.
Yeah, most people are like no, thank you. But if you're like, hey, like we should probably offer you guys some actual options if you do want to not work in the mines, because some of these folks, like they're like 3rd, 4th generation coal miners, like that's what they want to do. And if you don't offer a real option that'll actually allow them to have a proper union job with dignity, decent pay, that'll allow them to take care of their families, they're not going to be interested. Like you're not going to send a bunch of people to Tuscaloosa County and be like, okay, we're going to teach you how to code and that'll fix everything.
No, right.
It's not going to fix everything at all. But I think there's, I've had conversations with folks there, and like they're very cognizant that environmentally speaking, economically speaking, coal is on its way out. And they're just kind of hoping that it'll hang on or change, or sort of like something will happen that'll allow them to keep their jobs and keep their communities together. And I think that the messaging around that, I think that it is possible to reach those folks who may already have their mind up, as long as the messaging isn't just like, hey, dummy, your job is bad. Go learn to work on a computer. Like that's no one's.
I don't think anyone's saying that. We want them to work on windmills because they know what they're doing in terms of mechanics and whatnot.
We need to build a windmill once, and then how many jobs is that? And I will say that, I'm very active on Twitter, and I've been, talking about a lot about this strike. And people are pretty mean. Like people are, especially
because it does make you think like, well, we would like to close these coal mines, but they're not going to close them. They're just going to throw out the labor and bring in other labor to work for less. This isn't the way.
This is the thing. People are like, why are they even doing this? Like, because that's what the job is. Also, these folks, they mine metallurgical coal, which is used in steel production. So it's part of the broader conversation, but they're not keeping the lights on. They're mining coal to be sent overseas to rapidly industrializing nations. Like, it's so much more complicated than a tweet or like a quick blog post or a quick view can show. Like there's so much.
Yeah, because people think coal and then they look outside at their weather, because the climate crisis has reached everyone now. It's all over. It's not just island nations or the occasional strong hurricane. It's right out the window. So I think,
Alabama too. There've been some insane like tornadoes down there. Even when I was there, like these people know what's going on. It's just like this existential issue of like, I need to survive, but I want the planet to survive too. What do I do?
What do we do?
They're not being offered any real options. People are just kind of yelling at them.
Yeah. It does feel like the federal government needs to step in here with a big plan, perhaps a New Deal type plan, maybe a green one. Anyway, hey, Kim, thank you so much for following this. What do you see on the horizon? Has there been any movement, any shift, any signaling or indication that they will get a contract that benefits them?
I mean, hope springs eternal. They're still waiting for the bosses to come back with a decent contract. I really think that public pressure and media attention is going to be the game changer here, because you can get away with a lot in the shadows. I mean, they've been running trucks into people and barely anyone said a word. But now that they've gotten more media attention around this, I know that there's other media outlets who are doing stories. Like, I think that kind of pressure is really going to help. And honestly, they've built a really strong mutual aid, like community support structure. Some of the women told me they're already planning a toy drive for Christmas in case they need to do that. So they're not ready to give up. They're not willing to give up. This is really a matter of survival. Because if they go back, that's not really any life. Like it's really bad. It's a really difficult, horrible job to start with. But when you don't even get paid decent or get your health care covered, what's the point? So the UMWA has a very long history in Alabama and a very long history in this country. And there's a lot of grit and stubbornness and a lot of wins in that history. So I'm really hoping that they stay true to form and they outlast them.
Kim Kelly, independent labor journalist, thank you so much for joining us here today. We've been talking about the mine workers strike in Alabama at Warrior Met. Kim, is the author of the forthcoming book, Fight Like Hell, The Untold History of American Labor, which I'm assuming you're busy writing or finishing up right now because it's coming out April 2022.
Right in time for May Day. Yeah, I'm about halfway done, but I write real fast. I'm waiting for these miners to finish up this strike so I can put it in there.
Exactly. So, exactly. Follow Kim Kelly at one of my favorite social media handles I've ever seen, at Grim Kim on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're watching Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. Coming up next, we have an interview with the president of the Association of Flight Attendants Union there, Sara Nelson. She's here to talk with us about the miners' strike and what does it take to financially run a strike like this, and why are the flight attendants helping the miners, and how all of that works. In addition, she's going to give a comment on Biden and his policies on labor and where we are at with the labor movement right now. Here she is, Sara Nelson. Sara, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
I'm always happy to be here.
Well, there's a lot going on. Can you talk about what is happening in Alabama?
So the mine workers have been on strike since April 1st against Warrior Met. This is a company that mines coal, metallurgical coal, for the production of steel. And these mine workers have been on the job for the last 5 years working under a bankruptcy contract. So their contract was, torn to shreds through the bankruptcy court process, which means that they're not really making a living wage. They have forced overtime, no control over their schedules. The access to affordable health care when you're not making enough is very, very difficult. And they're fighting, they're essentially fighting a new system in this country where we are allowing Wall Street and hedge funds to control all of our business. And so they're on strike for issues that almost any worker in this country can relate to. And when you are forcing people to come to work that much, I talked to some miners down in Alabama who only had 4 days off last year. We're talking about people who go underground, don't see the daylight, don't see their kids, no control of their own lives. I mean, this sounds like stuff that that was the reason that the United Mine Workers of America was even formed over 100 years ago. So these are fundamental workers' rights issues that these miners are striking for, and the entire country needs to get in on this strike.
Absolutely. Talk about, so I understand that the Association of Flight Attendants gave about $10,000 to, or is it right? $10,000 to the miners' effort. What does it take financially to run a strike like this?
Yeah, so to have 1,000 people or 2,000 people out on strike for months and months is a real financial commitment by the union, because what you have to do is you have to make sure that people can withstand being out of work, not getting a paycheck. You're taking on the boss who has all the control, right? And all the money. And you're asking workers not to go to work, but they still have to make sure that their families are safe. They still have to make sure that they can survive. They still have to make sure that they can eat. So basic medical coverage, the UNWA is covering that for these strikers, and providing strike benefits actually that are higher than almost anywhere else. And that's allowing people with some level of assistance to be able to manage this strike. But the reality is that it's always tough when you are out on strike and you're out there with the threat of replacement workers, scabs, and a company that doesn't care and really just wants to break the union.
How many, not knowing how many people work at that coal mine, how big of a percentage of the workforce is 1,000 to 2,000 coal miners?
So this is, let's see, this is about 5% of the union that we're talking about, and that's a lot. But what this is really a moral fight. because Warrior Met is being controlled by big hedge funds like BlackRock, where many unions out in New York were protesting just yesterday out in front of BlackRock's offices.
Yes,
and including our members, the AFA members were there, because this is the same story. This isn't just about coal mines. This is about working people's rights in this country and the ability to actually get some of the value back that you are creating as a worker. That's what this fight is about. And it's also about recognizing the value of production. Workers are out there producing things that we all use that then are resources that are valuable to our country overall, right? And what does Wall Street give us other than a false view about how our economy is doing, right? And so as more and more control goes to Wall Street, this is getting worse and worse for workers, and all the productivity that workers have given to this country. We're the most productive workers in the world. Our wages have remained flat, and all of that extra work has gone into the pockets of Wall Street or the corporate elite.
Can you talk about unionization in general? Are you seeing an uptick in mobilization toward unionizing overall, given that it does seem like people are waking up to the fact that it really is the workers versus the hedge fund managers?
Yeah, I mean, so people... Look, all of the surveys show that a supermajority of Americans want to join a union. But why is it then that less than 10% of American workers are actually in a union? Well, it's because the laws are completely stacked against the ability for working people to claim their rights as working people. And the only way that you can claim those rights is if you organize in your workplace, that you can actually get to an election or a recognition by the company, which happens very, very little number of times. But getting to that election is very, very hard. And then the election process, everything is stacked against the workers, because even where there are penalties or laws that say that companies can't do certain things, the consequences are essentially a slap on the hand. And so most companies like an Amazon, you can withstand that. You can withstand the public pressure. You can withstand any kind of enforcement that the government may place on the company, because it is a drop in the bucket compared to the profits that they make off of these workers' backs. And they will use every kind of tactic to get workers not to support the union. And the biggest tactic that they use is saying that if you support the union, you're against the company. And so that clearly means that you don't want the company here. So if you vote for the union, we're just going to move the factory or the warehouse to another state or another city.
They can't move the coal mine. That's the one thing.
They can't move the coal mine. They can't move the coal mine. But what the company can do is create, 35, 50 entrances to the mine and try to sneak the scabs in and try to withstand the strike. I'll tell you, though, when I was in Alabama, I was very happy to be driving up towards the mines and see the trains sitting there on the track, dead stopped, not full of coal, but sitting there stopped because of the strike. But because it's Wall Street controlling this company, and they're so dead set against unions and retaining all the control, because it's really about control, right? They are helping Warrior Met take on this strike and take on the strikers and try to outlast them. There's no way Warrior Met's going to win. I've seen these strikers. They are committed. They're committed to each other, and they're committed to taking on this company. I mean, enough is enough. And when they are also mowing down the picketers outside of the mines, I mean, there's been physical interactions, actual cars running into the strikers. And what does that do? That just makes everyone more committed to beating these bastards,
And it unfortunately for the company gives you a nice news. I saw some newsreel footage. I think we played it early. We definitely played it last week in the show of people getting run over on a picket line, which certainly helps, I would imagine, the picketers.
Look, I just want to say this one thing. I didn't really learn about the labor movement until I was a part of it. And so I grew up in a working class family, but we didn't talk about unions. And I remember the first time that I watched Harlan County, about the strike in Harlan County in 1973. And I remember the opening scenes of the little girl in the wash tub on the table saying, I wish I could have a hot bath, Mommy. And she says, we just have to help your daddy win the strike, and then you can have hot water. And that little girl was my age. And this is again what these strikers are striking for. They're striking for their children. They're striking for basic human rights and conditions that we should expect for our labor. And it's really easy to stand with them because they're really fighting for all of us.
It seems really disgusting that the company doesn't even want to just give them what they already had before the workers so generously said, okay, we'll give you these things because we know you're in bankruptcy. It just to go back to what was expected before this bankruptcy happened. They're not even asking for more than what they were already given before.
Yeah, the bankruptcies are really an excuse to reset the terms of the labor agreements or to break them. And the managers always find a way to get bonuses and executive compensation. I remember in our 38-month-long bankruptcy with United Airlines, at the end of that bankruptcy, when we were still fighting to save our pensions, the managers were awarded with $400 million in executive bonuses. And the bankruptcy attorneys submitted a bill for $25 million for their lunches during the course of the bankruptcy. 80 million would have saved our pensions, but the court approved terminating our pensions, and at the same time approved those 400 million in bonuses for the executives. So, if we allow them to, they're always going to just look at us as a line item, not as people who deserve respect and a return for the value of our work. So this is really about giving them a beating. And I always say that in my experience as a labor leader, we either have to beat it out of them or they have to remember the beating they're going to take in order to deal with us fairly, because they have to understand the risks for not treating workers fairly in order to do the right thing.
Sara, could you quickly comment on the inability of the Amazon workers also in Alabama to be able to form a union?
Yeah, so so first of all, those Amazon workers organized very quickly. They were really committed. It was a brand new warehouse, actually, but they had some real gripes and they had a real reason to organize. And what was the first thing the company did? Well, they had the ability to go out and say that they were going to hire 2,000 more people. So they padded the list with people that they had just hired. That was the first thing they did. So those workers were up against unlimited amounts of money to work against them. And then I went to see the warehouse during the vote, and even though the labor board had told them that they could not have on-site voting, the company went and got a mailbox that looked like they got it from USPS and
they
put
ordered
it up right on company property. Yep. And they put it on company property right in front of the front door with a big tent around it saying vote here, a complete violation of labor law, right? And of the direct instructions from the government right before this vote. But they got away with it, and it sat there. And then what they did all the things that companies do. They had captive audience meetings where they stop production. They don't stop production for anything except for an anti-union meeting. And then after they got done with those, they brought in more supervisors and paid union busters at the tune of $3,500 a day. Brought scores of them in to just focus on beating the union, not on making Amazon a better company or making that workplace a better company or listening to the workers. There were things that they could have done in the workplace to make things better for those workers that actually would have made the workers say, maybe we don't need a union because the company's listening to us, which is also a tactic sometimes that companies will use. But they didn't do that. It was all about just beating the union and doing everything they could to make people scared to vote for the union, to say, with cameras trained on that tent outside of the warehouse, to call people up and say, hey, Joseph, we haven't seen you vote yet. So when you come to work tomorrow, make sure you bring your ballot and vote. That's what those workers were up against at the Amazon site. Wow. Unlimited amounts of money, unlimited amounts of control, and no check and no accountability from anyone.
Do you think their struggle will continue? Will they continue to try to organize in some way?
100%, because again, management looks at those workers as a line item, and there are plenty of issues to organize around in the workplace anytime. Even at good companies, there's issues to organize around in the workplace. But when you think of people as disposable, and you treat them as disposable, and you treat them simply as a cost line item in the company, that will ultimately lead to people saying, enough is enough, and we're going to band together and stop this. And listen, I mean, some of the things that we have to do as a labor movement is really put the demands out there for what labor law should be, like with the PRO Act, and help people understand that the deck is stacked against us. And what that really does is it helps people understand that the reason that I don't have a union, the reason I don't have a say, and the reason that that I don't have a contract when my management does, is because the laws are stacked against me. And so these are important, and it's important that we fight for this, just like fighting for any other social right.
Sara Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants Union. Final thoughts here on what President Biden can and should do with his ostensibly pro-union stance that he has been talking about in order to support both the formation of unions, the strengthening of the unions that are already there, and anything else he can do to help organize labor?
Well, look, I mean, President Biden has done a good job of making labor central to this administration. And I would say that one of the things that is the most helpful that he did was help other Democrats understand that they can't just have labor as an applause line, but he's got this task force that he's put the vice president in charge of and is making it a cabinet level task force. And every single Democrat in his administration is having to face the fact that they have to put labor central to what they're doing. And I'll tell you, a lot of them don't understand it, but I do appreciate the fact that he's making them have to go through that exercise, have to listen to this, have to be able to make labor more central to the work that every agency and department is completing. And so there's a lot more work to do here. Like, we've got to pass the PRO Act in the legislation. That's got to be attached, for example, to the reconciliation bill, so that we improve this. We're not going to get everything that's in the PRO Act, because through reconciliation, there will just be some things that we can't get through. But if we can even get half of what's in the PRO Act, it's going to improve the position of working people to be able to organize. And as we organize more and as we raise expectations more, that will naturally lead to more organizing and more unions and more setting the economy to the workers and not so much to the corporate elite.
Sara Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, thank you so much for being on our show, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. This has been Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. We are asking you to please share our content. Leave us a comment. We'd like to hear the kind of things you'd like to see covered in terms of progressive activism, the kind of things we cover on this program. Thanks for watching. We will see you next week when we are covering Medicare for All. There was a rally this week. We're going to talk about that next week. And we're also going to be covering some environmental action that's going on. Thanks so much for watching. See you then.